Despite not being a very long game, Undertale is a game that's been talked about to death on the internet. Undertale is an ingenious game that seems charming and childlike on the surface, yet has a dirty secret unlocked by the player's own twisted intentions. The game is a top-down perspective turn-based RPG in a mostly 8-bit art style. What Undertale has become known for, however, is its freedom of decision compared to other games in its genre. The game contains 3 major routes the player can take: neutral, pacifist, and genocide. These are just the 3 major routes. For example, the pacifist route has a different ending depending on if you fully befriend the characters or not. The neutral route, however, has over 90 different combinations apparently. Anyway, the point of this video isn't to educate you on how the routes work in this game, because you probably already know. In this video, we'll be asking the moral question: is the neutral route of Undertale good or bad? Is Frisk a bad person or a good person in the neutral route? This is a difficult question to answer confidently. I think a lot of nuance is required for figuring this out, so because of this, we need to lay down some ground rules. Before we do that though, YouTube tells me only around 3% of my viewers are actually subscribed. What are you doing, guys? Subscribe or I'll trim your guinea pig's toenails. Now let's get started. Before we get into the rest of the ground rules, we're gonna start with the most important thing. Like the title suggests, this video will be covering morality. As human beings, we all have our own moral beliefs. None of us have the exact same beliefs, and if we did, that would be concerning. In this video, I'll be giving my own thoughts on whether this or that is morally correct, and there may be things in this video you disagree with, and that's great. You're always welcome to share your thoughts in the comments. In fact, I encourage it. So let's get into the rest of the ground rules. First of all, it's important to mention that when I say the word morality in this video, I'm not talking about the morality of the person who is playing the game. I'm only talking about the morality of the character you play as, Frisk. For example, just because the player kills Papyrus on purpose despite there being no reason to, that does not depict their morality as a human being at all. It's a video game. The Undertale community is notorious for harassing people who don't play the game the way they want them to. I've had people in my comment sections calling me a soulless human being because I liked the genocide route. I guess you're just not allowed to like fun boss fights, great music, and phenomenal writing. There is absolutely nothing morally wrong about doing bad things in a game, and so I wanted to mention this as a clarification. Yes, Undertale is an immersive game. Yes, the game encourages you to guide Frisk in order to do what's right, but judging people's character based on what they do in a fictional game is not healthy behavior in my view. Another thing that's important to know is that I'm approaching this video as if Frisk is playing through the world of Undertale for the first time. Basically, in Undertale, when you reset the game in order to replay it, the reset is actually a canonical event. As far as I'm aware of, Frisk, Flowey, and Sans are the main characters that are aware of these resets. So let's say hypothetically, Frisk just finished Undertale and has decided to reset the timeline to play through again. Since Frisk now knows that their choices decide the fate of others, is Frisk morally responsible for what happens to everyone? If Frisk is more knowledgeable on the nature of these characters and the fact that they really aren't that dangerous, should Frisk be morally obligated to spare them? Well, my answer is I don't know. What I do know, however, is that I will be approaching this video as if Frisk does not know any better. This is Frisk's first time falling down to the underground and meeting these characters for the first time. Since I'm doing it this way, I'll be very lenient on the self-defense aspect. And finally, the neutral route of Undertale is an extremely flexible way of playing the game. There's a ton of decisions you're allowed to make while still fitting the guidelines of a neutral playthrough. Some of these decisions are morally worse than others. For example, I think most of us would agree killing Papyrus for no reason when sparing him comes without cost is probably not the right thing to do, but we'll analyze this one later in the video. I think we're ready to begin. We'll be dissecting most of the major events throughout the neutral run. Let's begin. We'll start with the encounters in the ruins. We begin our adventure by falling into a patch of flowers and we immediately meet Flowey. Whether you take his attacks head on or you're smart enough to not trust him, there's no morally correct or incorrect way to approach this encounter, so let's move on. Anyway, just before Flowey kills you, you're saved by Toriel. By the way, when I use second person pronouns in this video, I'm still referring to Frisk the character, not you the viewer. So Toriel helps to guide you through the ruins by teaching you to solve puzzles and whatnot. She also teaches you how to fight enemies, or rather, how to not fight them. We're immediately met with a tough moral question here. Toriel tells us to strike a conversation with the enemy rather than fighting it, and if we choose to physically defeat it, she reassures that we do not want to hurt anybody. Then in the next room, we encounter our first real enemy. If you spare the enemy, Toriel will help you by intimidating it, but if you kill the enemy, Toriel never scolds you for it. But we know she saw the player kill the enemy because she was standing right there the whole time. I still think that if you encounter a random frog minutes after you were told not to hurt things, you shouldn't shouldn't immediately aim to kill it. However, we need to try and think rationally for the other side as well, and consider the fact that we're playing as a very small child in this game, a child that could have been pretty scared when a monster came up to them and squared off. Whether you think it's wrong to kill this enemy or you think it's fine, the good thing is that we can spare this enemy while still preserving the neutral route. So after she tests your independence, you and Toriel separate because she needs to go back to her home for something. This means Frisk no longer has Toriel's protection and guidance when encountering enemies, unlike the first enemy you encountered at the beginning. Because of this, I think basically every enemy encounter leading up to Toriel's boss fight is morally acceptable. You encounter many monsters as you make your way to her house, and being a child all alone in a world you do not yet understand, defending yourself against attackers is more than justified. Now you might be saying, why not just spare the enemies? It's true that you can spare a few of these enemies on the very first turn without attacking or even acting. It's also true that you could just run away from enemies as well. But do these two things negate the morality of defending yourself against an enemy that is trying to kill you? I don't think so. Sparing enemies is a heroic thing to do, but it's heroic because it's not expected, especially of a small child. Just because sparing is a noble act does not mean that defending yourself is an evil act, and because it's not an evil act, it's not immoral, thus it is okay. There's also an encounter with a ghost called Nabstabluk. This ghost is blocking your path, so Frisk decides to forcefully move the ghost. Now you can't actually kill the ghost, obviously, because it's a ghost, but you can attempt to kill him, and it's intentions that matter. Nabstabluk is sort of fighting back, but also not taking it too seriously. Frisk could probably avoid him pretty easily, but you can still die from the ghost. It's difficult to say whether or not trying to kill the ghost is correct or not. I'm leaning towards it being okay, but we can spare him just fine anyway, so let's move on. Now we're finally at the Toriel boss fight. We get in an altercation with her because Frisk has the instinct to leave the ruins in order to get back home, but Toriel doesn't want you to leave because she believes your soul will be taken by Asgore. She challenges you to a fight so you can prove yourself worthy. A lot of people will say that killing Toriel in this fight is morally wrong, but I very much disagree. Sure, it's heartwarming to spare her and for her to accept the fact that we need to try and get back to the surface regardless, but remember, she challenged Frisk to a fight. She quite literally demanded Frisk to fight. If you fight back and win, that's on Toriel, not Frisk. Even though Toriel has a good heart, she is actively holding you against your will. I don't think Toriel is a bad person, but I don't think you're a bad person for killing her in this boss fight either. She started the fight, she asked you to prove yourself, and for those reasons, killing Toriel in this way is 100% justified. Now yes, it might not be fun to witness emotionally, but in this video, we need to think rationally rather than emotionally. Something I wish the Undertale fandom could do more often, but let's move on. We now find ourselves in another interaction with Flowey, in which if you did the route the same way I did in this footage, Flowey criticizes your morality by pointing out that you spared Toriel but killed other monsters. It's important to remember a few things. First of all, Flowey doesn't mind killing people anyway, considering he tried to kill us. He's also attempting to manipulate you right here. No matter how you play the game, he will find a way to criticize you for it, and I find it ironic that he criticizes the player for self-defense. Meanwhile, he often recites one of his defining principles, it's kill or be killed. Now we find ourselves in a snowy forest as we meet two skeletons by the name of Sans and his brother Papyrus. For some reason my microphone really hates when I say the word Papyrus, so bear with me. Anyway, we'll get to Papyrus's boss fight here in a minute. The first unique encounter in this snowy forest involves a fight with Doggo, in which you are completely justified in killing because right before encountering him, he threatens to kill any human he sees. It doesn't matter his attacks are insanely easy to dodge. He is actively trying to kill humans and even announces it. Then there's this encounter with these two married dogs. They pick up a scent and then say out loud that they want to eliminate you. Defending yourself against these two, justified as well. Then we get an encounter with an enemy called Greater Dog. This guy's pretty cute, at least at first. Sure, this thing might look cute to us, but he's also wearing 500 pounds worth of armor and carrying an 8-foot tall spear. He also initiates the encounter like the majority of them. Yep, justified as well. Now we finally get to Papyrus and his boss fight, and this is just a quick prediction. I feel like this is going to be the most difficult moment in the game to come to any sort of conclusion with in this video, but I will try my best anyway. So you can choose to spare Papyrus or kill Papyrus. When the boss fight is nearing its end, he'll deliberately tell you that he is offering you his mercy. Because of this, I do think that we're morally obligated to accept this truce, but of course it's never as simple as that. Before the boss begins, he does tell you that he will attempt to capture you, and naturally, since this is a boss fight, you can die to it. The thing about this is, we already get so much background on who Papyrus is and what his personality is like before this fight, mostly from his brother who tells us that Papyrus is not dangerous even if he tries to be. Listen, if you could accidentally kill him in the middle of battle when his HP drops to 0, I wouldn't have an issue, but the fact that he offers his mercy and you can clearly see that he is extremely worn out and tired from fighting, he's no longer a threat. I'll leave the rest of this conversation up to the comments, so let me know down below. We're now in an area known as Waterfall. We overhear a conversation between Papyrus and his boss Undyne, in which we clearly see that he is nervous and very careful with his demeanor when talking to her. This should have immediately made Frisk fear Undyne, especially considering we almost got caught a minute later. Then we meet a little kid named Monster Kid, who is absolutely obsessed with Undyne and views her as a role model. Then after various accounts of avoiding being captured by Undyne, we interact with Monster Kid again, and they end up almost slipping, and we help Monster Kid back up. If you choose not to help them up, Undyne saves the day anyway, but this is a morally wrong thing to do in my opinion. Now yes, Frisk is only a kid, yes Undyne is watching you on the other side of the bridge, but ignoring a kid who's about to fall to their death, yeah, I don't think so. I think you need to save Monster Kid to preserve your morality. If you're noticing, the problem with the neutral route is how flexible it is. There are hundreds of choices to make in this route, so even when we do encounter a situation that might be wrong, there's always a way to just avoid it while still preserving the route. But we still have a good bit of the game to cover, so maybe that will change. I also forgot to mention the Mad Dummy, which is a boss fight in Waterfall. There's not really anything morally correct or incorrect about this encounter though. It's another ghost like Nabstabluk. However, this one is much more aggressive and initiates the encounter himself. Eventually he just gives up, so there's really nothing to talk about with this boss fight in terms of morality. And now we're about to have a showdown with Undyne. First of all, we have a discussion with her before the fight in which a wide variety of conversations may happen. It all depends on the choices you've made so far. If you're like me, Undyne criticizes you for killing enemies. She says you've wiped out the entire canine unit in her army. She also makes blatantly ignorant assumptions, saying you didn't kill these enemies in self-defense, but you killed them because it's easier. Yes, everyone, let's disregard the fact that hundreds of monsters are working together to catch and later murder this toddler, and only focus on the fact that Frisk is better at fighting than they are. Undyne is thinking emotionally instead of rationally, something she does often for better or for worse. And as for the boss fight itself, you are completely, and I mean completely justified in killing her here. Listen, I think Undyne is a great character, even if it sounds like I'm ripping her to shreds here. She shines as a character mostly in the Genocide route. The neutral route is not her best performance, but the ending sequence to this boss fight is honestly probably the saddest moment in the entirety of the game. But remember that we're thinking rationally. We can still feel bad for Undyne even if we're defeating her. This wasn't a very difficult one to decide. It's cool if you spare Undyne because she's not an evil person at heart, but I think you would be in the right for defeating her as well. Also, about that opening sequence where you exchange words, it's worth mentioning that even if you spare the enemies, she will still find a way to criticize you by calling you a coward, kind of like how Flowey finds a way to criticize you no matter what. I like Undyne as a video game character, but she's definitely in the wrong here. Now that Undyne is defeated, we'll move on to Hotland. There's not much to talk about in terms of morality for a while here, so we're gonna jump all the way to an encounter with two royal guards. They eventually figure out you're the human they're supposed to be hunting, and it's a pretty funny encounter all around, but the most important thing is that they openly tell you that they're going to kill you. I think you know where I'm going with this. Completely justified once again. Next is a boss fight with a spider named Muffet. She traps you and threatens to eat you. I don't think I need to say more. Some may say that it's wrong to kill this boss because you can skip it entirely. However, that requires buying some food from a random cobweb in the ruins, which in no way lets you know that this helps you skip a boss 3 hours later. There's no reason Frisk should know how to do this, especially on the first playthrough, and even if, Muffet is still trying to kill you. Completely justified. So now at this point, we've made it through Hotland, and now we find ourselves in a sci-fi looking building called The Core. In here, we have a final showdown with Mettaton, a character I haven't talked about in this video yet because no morality was assigned to any of his encounters until now. He transforms into this Elvis Presley looking dude, and now you can finally do damage to him. You can either destroy Mettaton by attacking or wait for the ratings to hit 10,000 or something like that. There's not really anything wrong with killing Mettaton in my opinion. He threatens to kill you multiple times throughout the game and is literally described by Alphys as a killer robot with a thirst for human blood. You could also make the argument that Mettaton is just a robot anyway, so you can't murder him even if you tried, but I'm not sure that's the best argument to make for a game like Undertale. None of the characters you kill in the game are humans, so by that logic, you can't murder any of them. Plus, I mean, Sans and Papyrus are already dead if you think about it. Either way, I don't think it's wrong to kill Mettaton, so let's move on. I think we can safely move on to the final boss now, Asgore. Asgore is a really interesting boss both in a gameplay sense and a morality sense. Even though Asgore is hyped up to be the evil mastermind, he ends up sort of meeting those expectations. He's a nice guy aside from the whole I'm gonna take your soul thing he's got going on. Anyway, once you defeat him, you actually get a choice on whether or not to let him live, or you can kill him to cross the barrier and make it back home. I think most people end up sparing Asgore like what I did on my first run of the game, but I don't think you're a bad person for killing him either, and here's why. The conversation you have after you defeat him is really interesting. It highlights the fact that Asgore is not a bad man at heart, but a man who's endured relentless suffering and has essentially gone insane because of it. He actually tells Frisk to kill him in order to take his soul, that way you can get home. So yes, Asgore actually tells Frisk to finish him off. It's a pretty interesting moment in the game no matter what choice you make. Except it gets rudely interrupted by Flowey. Flowey turns out to be the real final boss, and I think I speak for everyone when I say we all shit our pants when we saw this for the first time. It's not too difficult of a fight, and now we're left with one final decision: kill or spare Flowey. I've actually never spared Flowey in a neutral route before, but that's because I think he deserves to be killed. So it goes without saying that I'm okay with whatever choice you make here, and that was it. You have just beaten Undertale. Now that we've covered the neutral route from start to finish, let's discuss anything else worth discussing. The neutral route of Undertale is an incredibly vague route because there's so many choices that can be made while still preserving the same general outcome. While I didn't find anything absolutely morally unacceptable about this route, aside from maybe not helping Monster Kid, it all depends on perspective at the end of the day. That's why I made this video in the first place, to give you my perspective. Undertale is a game that combines simplistic gameplay with a complex atmosphere and narrative, allowing it to stay relevant online for decades. And this discussion is no exception. It was an interesting and entertaining discussion to have, and I hope you enjoyed. There's one last thing I want to talk about before we wrap it up. So you know how in Undertale you encounter enemies the same way you would in, let's say, a Pokemon game? You're walking around, minding your own business, and then boom, you find yourself in the middle of a battle. Here's something to think about. If Frisk's intentions are to deliberately encounter a battle, it becomes murder when you kill the enemy. But if Frisk is not trying to get in an encounter but kills in self-defense, it isn't murder. The problem is we don't really have a way of knowing for sure what intention Frisk has. My best insight would be to say that in the Genocide route, Frisk is obviously trying to initiate battles, which is why it's considered murder. But in other routes, such as Pacifist or Neutral, it's implied by the plot and narrative that Frisk is encountering these enemies by accident. So in Neutral, enemies are finding Frisk, but in Genocide, Frisk is finding enemies. Anyway, that's just a random tangent I wanted to go over. In conclusion, I believe the neutral route of Undertale is exactly as advertised. It's just neutral. It's not inherently good or bad. You can make decisions that are worse than others, but you can also finish the route as a pretty good person, in my opinion. I'm hoping for a thought-provoking comment section. Make sure to subscribe to the channel for more video essays or other long-form content, and I'll see you guys again soon.